Quilting is one of my favorite hobbies. Quilting is about loving fabric. Fabric is so much fun to fold and refold, stack and rearrange, and to leave out as decoration in my sewing room. It is our personal expression when we make fabric choices. Today, I have a lovely wedding ring quilt to share with you and a baby quilt using one of my favorite techniques, puffing. Those little gathers create such a beautiful texture. Let's start sewing and express ourselves through stitches. You are going to love these quilts. Isn't this adorable? And you know, one of the reasons I think it's so adorable is because it is very easy to make, but also it has paper dolls. As a matter of fact, this paper doll happens to be my husband Joe when he was a little boy. And then these cute clothes that, well, some of them might have been the things he wore and some of them might not have been, but these are adorable paper dolls on this traditional quilt. Now the wedding ring quilt is right here also using paper dolls, and I do have to tell you this is a paper doll version of me when I was a little girl. And you see inside the wedding ring, by the way, this is an easy wedding ring quilt to make. I can't wait for you to be with us for the rest of the show. Inside the little sections you will find paper dolls, including some of the hats. And I'm not sure my hair ever had quite that perfect a bow in it when I was little, but I just absolutely love to know that I have some paper dolls. Okay, now we're going to have fun. Let's see how easy this quilt is to make. First of all, these patterns are pre-printed on an iron-on interfacing. So all you've got to do is cut out your patterns. So I've cut out one of the strips right here, and if you will look carefully, you will see there's a straight line and a dotted line. The straight line is for sewing and the dotted line is for cutting. Okay, next let's see what we've got here. The straight, this is, by the way, you put the interfacing, the iron-on interfacing, the rough side to the right side of the fabric. Now then, what we're going to do is straight stitch along the straight line, and then we're going to cut along the dotted line. Okay, here I've already done that. Here's straight stitch and cut, and there's a little dotted line in the middle, and I'm going to cut it apart so I will have two sections which look like this. Now that has to be turned right side out. When I turn it right side out, this is what it looks like, and you see we have the iron-on interfacing all ready to be ironed on. I'm going to place 4 of these on my quilt square. Here's the first one placed down, already ironed on, and here's the second one. Let me pull it down. It will be placed down also and then ironed on, and then I'm going to use an invisible thread to stitch it with. Although I have used a red thread on this sample so you can see it, I'm going to use my invisible thread. Now, not wash away basting thread, just invisible thread. Let's see how we get those adorable squares at the corners. All right, I have a square fabric. I'm going to fold it back to get the middle point. All right, I've got the middle point marked, so I'm going to straight stitch on the middle point. You see there, I'm going to have a half square there. Now, after I get it stitched, I'm going to pick up the top part of the square. All right, I pick up the top part and cut away the bottom part of the square, leaving just the one thickness of fabric. And when it all gets put together, this is what it looks like. The half squares and then the half moons for the double wedding ring. I'm so glad to have as my guest today my friend Connie Palmer. Connie is a Husqvarna Viking educator as well as a Martha Pullen licensed teacher. Connie, thank you so much for coming to the show and show us how you did that wonderful quilt.
This is the easiest quilt you ever do. I tried to do double wedding ring before and I was not very successful. Okay. Believe me. But there's just lots of tricks. I'm going to show you a couple more tricks. You had solid rings, what you did, and I'm going to show you the pieced rings.
Oh, okay.
So if you remember, your pattern comes already printed on the interfacing. And you just have to cut those strips away. But to make the little pieced rings, if you take, a nice little tip is that if you take all your strips and you line them up the way that you're going to piece them together. So if you have 2 that are right side together and then 2 that are right side together, then when you use the little template, you're going to use your rotary cutter, you can just cut these into the little packs of shapes, you see? And so now they'll be ready to just sew together. You just pick them apart and they're already right side together. So that's a good little tip for that. That makes it a little easier. And then you'll do the same thing. Now here we have all of them sewn together. And it's bigger than your ring. So again, you're going to lay rough to right. You're going to sew on the straight line and cut on the dotted line. And then we have to turn it right side out. And an easy way to turn these right side out is to use this tube turner. Just slide your tube up into the ring, and then you use your little, it's a little pigtail that wraps in there, and you'll see that you can just pull this right side out very simply. Isn't that easy?
Wonderful
So that
tool.
makes that real easy. So now you have them all turned right side out. So the next step now is you have to press those so that they're nice and flat. And I was finger pressing these first, but I found that if I used a non-stick pressing sheet and an iron, you could press them real easy. And so they're nice and flat, and it doesn't stick to the non-stick press sheet. And then you press them onto your fabric like you had said. So just press them on there. Then we're going to use the clear monofilament thread and use just a small little heirloom applique stitch. Just goes forward and then one zig, one zag. And just stitch those down. And then you can't even tell that they're hardly sewn on. There's just a tiny stitch. And then you'll add your little corner pieces. Just take your square, fold it in half very nicely, just press it. That way you can just place it right on your corner and flip it, and then you'll straight stitch. Now one tip for that is don't sew right on the crease, just sew a little bit to the inside of the crease, like a needle's width. That way when you flip this back, you won't take up too much room. It'll fold back perfectly that way. Oh, and then you trim this part away, and then you just sew the squares together.
And then
I mean, it's
here
so
is
easy.
This adorable quilt with the paper dolls in the middle. And Connie, really, you could use any machine embroidery.
Any machine
or
embroidery.
any.
Right.
This is just a fun quilt if you love to do machine embroidery, which is most of us today.
Right.
Connie, thank you so much for that.
You're sure welcome.
Wonderful, wonderful, easy wedding
Everybody
ring
needs to make one.
quilt.
Yes.
And now Connie has some sewing inspirations for you. Connie, it looks to me like that easy technique translated beautifully to the home decorating pillow.
It did. I mean, I could just see it. You know, in all the fabulous home decorating books, you see these big pillows. And so I used the same printed interfacing so you can quilt smartly.
You can quilt smartly and easily. You know we love that word easy.
That's right.
This is the most gorgeous. Talk about a beautiful pillow. Connie, tell us about this.
Well, I like antique pillow shams because I like the look of it with the home dec also. So I just designed this big pillow sham with, this has cut work on it and lace shaping, all the little things that we like to do in heirloom sewing. Put a nice big feather pillow in there and you have a home deck project.
Oh, so beautiful. And this adorable little purse.
It's just a little bag that's quilted, and then it has embroidery and lace, and we call them bling blings.
Bling blings are diamonds. Bling blings are diamonds that we glue on.
Right, exactly. Just to kind of
blings.
bring the quilting and the heirloom together.
Oh, and it also gives a little contemporary
Exactly.
Oh my, the pillow.
The pillow. This has embroidery and quilting also. It has a fan, you know, your traditional fan pattern, done with lace and the different heirloom fabrics, and then it's quilted. And just has a good combination of the two types of techniques.
And you know, I love red work.
I love red
So
work,
this is red work done in pink. Peach work.
Yeah,
Pink work, okay.
So it's just a real quick, easy, sort of a lap quilt, baby quilt kind of thing. And it's just red work done with a different color thread, just to match the pieces of fabric that I had.
Absolutely precious. Now this adorable vest. Oh, how cute.
This was a vest that we had to do for convention, for a challenge. We each had a fabric pack, and so this was my challenge that I did, and I just combined embroidery and quilting together to use all the fabrics that we were given.
Turn this around to show how cute it is in the back.
And then a fussy cut, the big flowers, and then quilted around
Now
it.
the big flowers, a fussy cut,
just a strip. I just cut a strip
Oh, a
down.
strip. Oh,
And then
okay.
so that I could have them in the middle, and then I just quilted around the flowers.
Connie, do you remember a long time ago when we used to get prints that had these flowers, and we
Yes.
would cut them out and then use flour and paste
Right.
to hold them to the skirt before we applique
Right,
it? Did you ever
exactly.
do that?
Yes, ma'am.
I had a beautiful orange dress. My mother, I can still see her dipping those flowers.
Right.
Dipping those flowers in flour and water to stick them
Right.
on so she could applique it.
Right.
Connie, thank
Oh,
you
thank
so
you.
much.
Thank you, Martha.
And now Connie has some scrapbooking ideas for you. Connie, I cannot wait for you to share with our viewers those fun techniques you have for scrapbooking.
Thanks. I love to do scrapbooking. Don't
Sure.
you?
Oh,
my
yeah, we
gosh.
all do.
And to go through all the pictures and everything, that's, kind of makes it fun.
Yeah.
But this one is my other baby girl. I had my pet the first time.
Your doggy?
My doggy. Now this time I have my granddaughter, and she loves to sew. Thank goodness she loves to
Oh, I
sew
love
and help.
it.
Yeah. So we had to make, and she just did her first quilt. So we made a scrapbook page for her first quilt. So we just added, this embroidery was already done, and this one is a new embroidery disc that's coming out. It has the little dress, and it says beautiful on it, like it's sewing. And then I found this in a little store. It was just a stick-on tape measure. So I thought that added to it. And then of course we cut it into ovals. But what I want to show you is how to sew these this little feathery trim on, and then how to do the embroidery. So the first thing I'm going to show you is the feathery trim. Now I just held two pieces together, and what you want to remember is there is a grain to this fluffy, feathery stuff. So you want to sew against the grain, you see, so that it fluffs out.
To make it even fluffier.
Right. So if you just kind of run your fingers across it. Now all you have to do is slide it up underneath the foot, and I'm just simply going to zigzag it together. Now I've put green thread in here so that you could see. But once you get it started, you just zigzag right down the middle, zigzagging them together. And that's very easy. But the main tip, the main thing I want you to know is to check the grain, you see. So now
you can fluff it up.
So you can fluff it up. See how pretty it is? Now, I want to talk about the embroidery that I did on this little oval. This is a little good little trick that they told us. If you take this double stick tape and put it on both sides of the hoop on the inside, then just set the hoop right on the paper, you see? So you're just sticking the paper down to the hoop. Then you just put your embroidery unit on and slide this on, and you just embroider right on this paper. So you don't have to hoop the paper.
You didn't have to. Well, that was
Is that a
certainly
good trick?
That was certainly ruining the scrapbook
Right.
page.
So it's a great trick, and you can embroider
Just stick
anything
it
on
to
the
the
paper. Right.
bottom.
Just stick it right on the paper.
Oh,
Isn't that
my
great?
goodness. Oh,
so
Connie,
double
it
stick
is
tape.
great.
Right.
Double stick tape. Available anywhere?
Anywhere. Right.
Okay. Okay. Connie, thank you so much for
Oh, well,
being
thank
here.
you.
always add so much fun to the show,
Oh, thanks.
and I love the way you make everything easy.
Easy, easy, easy. That's right.
Thank you
Thanks.
so much, Connie.
Thank you.
And now I have some machine embroidery for you. I'm so happy to have as my guest today Lindee Goodall. Lindee is Vice President of Creative Designs for Cactus Punch. Lindee, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Martha. It's great to be here.
I can't wait to see what you have, all the wonderful projects over there.
Well, today we're doing 3D embroidery. And when we talk about 3D embroidery, we mean embroidery that's cut out and is freestanding. So all three of these are examples of 3D embroidery. Now I have a dragonfly that we're going to work on today. And we're going to make the wings 3D, and the body is embroidered right on your garment. So when you look at these designs, there are actually two designs involved, and you have to do the 3D part first so that it's ready to put down when you're ready to sew it into the rest of the body.
Okay, that
So
is
let's
so cute.
Look at how we do that. The wings are sewn on nylon organza. And nylon organza is a low melt fabric, and it's easy to work with because we're going to use a soldering iron today to melt away the extra fabric.
Nylon organza, okay.
So I've hooped my organza, and organza is very thin, it's very strong. And it's kind of deceptive because you think that it's not going to support your design, but it does very well. And on this one, I've actually taped it into my hoop with duct tape to keep it from slipping. Now this is not the ideal way to do it, and a better way is to use one of these hooping aids and just hoop that in there with your fabric, and that would keep it from slipping. It's a much better option. But if you don't have one of these available for your hoop, then I've just used duct tape on both sides to keep the fabric from slipping.
That's a fascinating idea.
So after it's embroidered, we're going to cut out carefully around the edges, and you can see where I've cut all along here, and then I have my wings all cut out, and we do have little pokey fibers sticking out, and we want to get rid of those. So what we'll do is we'll use a soldering iron. And here I have a low wattage soldering iron, and all I'm going to do is I'm going to go quickly around the edges, just very lightly, and I'm going to keep wiping this off on this towel so that I don't have melted fabric that gets on here and turns this brown. I didn't turn this on today so that we don't burn ourselves.
I get very hot.
Yes, it does get very hot. So now at the machine, I have my dragonfly body. He's all embroidered up to the color where I need to put my wings. And so I'm going to lay my wings down in here, and I'm just going to use just a bit of spray. You need to use a little bit of temporary embroidery spray adhesive. And we'll just put those wings right down there. And we'll start our machine. And it's going to ask me to trim the thread.
Machines are so smart.
They are, aren't they?
Even stops to tell you to trim the thread, and I think that's good.
This is so incredibly fun. Now, I would recommend that you don't put these kinds of things on garments that are going to be worn a lot or washed a lot. Use it more like a pin. In fact, you can sew these the way that I sewed some of the earlier ones. Let me pull up that one pin. And if we did it more like this, then you could just pin it on your garment and take it off when you do your laundry. And
I think that's beautiful. And you know, Lindee, my granddaughters who are, let's see, 11 and 13, two of my granddaughters call them brooches, which is what we used to call them.
Yes.
What my mother-in-law, who was born in 1902, but they said, now, Nanny, those are brooches, they're not pins. So actually, we could make a brooch out of this dragonfly, couldn't we?
We could. And now our dragonfly is ready to fly off. And
oh, Lindee, that is fast. So 3D embroidery,
3D
have
embroidery.
lots of fun, a new dimension for machine embroidery. Next, I have a beautiful heirloom baby quilt for you, and the technique is going to be entredeux along with some puffing.
This beautiful baby quilt will truly be worthy of going into a museum. However, it'll be a whole lot more fun if you make it for a baby in your family. The technique that I want to share with you today is the traditional technique of puffing, or ruching as some people call it. This beautiful puffing strip is really all of the embellishment in this particular square, except for the fact that we have entredeux on both sides of the puffing. Now this is what I mean when I call something puffing. It is gathered on both sides and then stabilized, in this case with with entredeux. Actually, this is purchased entredeux. Of course, some of your sewing machines make wing needle entredeux. Now I'm going to talk today about puffing done the regular way with no gathering foot, although if you have a gathering foot, you certainly can use your gathering foot to do your puffing. But we're going to talk about puffing just with a straight stitch on your sewing machine. First of all, run long stitches when you're going to gather. Now the puffing strip, you can see it looks like this originally. It's important to divide it up into sections. We have divided this strip into one section, one section, one section, in other words, thirds. And you mark where the third of a point is and where the third of a point is. You see that line right there and that line right there? That's important when we start lining it up with entredeux in just a few minutes. Now, as you already know, when you gather, you pull the bobbin. You pull the threads from the bobbin. You might even want to put a heavier thread on the bobbin. All right, I have this gathering started. And I pull, by the way, both of the threads. I run 2 rows of gathering. Now, don't you remember when you were, a long time ago in home ec, some people said, well, you didn't need to run but 1 row of gathering. Well, you need at least 2 rows of gathering. Long stitches, and I'm pulling it, and I'm going to slip it along. Of course, I hold on to both of the bobbin threads at one time, and I slip the puffing along. Then I'm going to go to the other side, and I'm going to gather it. And one of the things you'll want to do is we want to kind of keep it even as you go along. Now here is my first line where I divided into a third. Now that's looking pretty good. And by the way, I will also gather the other end of the puffing from the other end. What I don't want to do is to get all this puffing gathered and then pull one of the threads out. So I like to gather from end to the middle, from end to the middle. Now after this particular piece of puffing is gathered, and you can see I have a beautiful gather here, let me show you why it was important to mark that third point, and third point. Right here is the mark on the third of a point, and I've lined it up with the mark on the puffing, that mark a third of the piece. Here is another third of a point I marked on the entredeux, and I've lined it up with the mark on the fabric that showed where the next 1/3 mark was. Here is the third 1/3 mark, and I've lined it up. Now do you see how pretty and evenly I have distributed these gathers? That's real important. All right, I'm going to put the entredeux down because now I'm going to show you a technique, entredeux to gathered fabric. All right, the entredeux has a seam allowance on both sides, and some of you might be going to say, now Martha, what is entredeux? Well, if you look at it real carefully, it looks like a railroad track for ants. Actually, it's a French word which means between the two. And it's used in heirloom sewing to go in between two things. All right, I've pinned the entredeux, and I'm going, do you see the ditch? There's a ditch on that seam allowance. I'm going to stitch in the ditch, this time with a regular stitch length, not a long. I'm going to stitch in the ditch, straight stitch, and then I'm going to trim the whole seam allowance, the gathers as well as the seam allowance, down to about a little bit over 1/8 of an inch. And then I'm going to go back after I trim it and zigzag over it. That's called stitch in the ditch, trim, and zigzag. I repeat, I do not stitch into those holes of the entredeux at any time. Now when it is finished, all right, let me show you. This one is straight stitch. That would be called stitch in the ditch. I will trim it down to about 1/4 of an inch, and then I will zigzag, encasing all of those fuzzies of the gathered fabric and the seam allowance of the entredeux. Okay, here I've done it. Stitch in the ditch, trim, and zigzag, and then I'm going to press it back. And if you want to, after you press it back, you can go back and do just a little hole stitch, a little tiny zigzag, so you are sure that you held that particular seam in the back, so you can be sure it won't pop out. Now this way I can see all of the holes on my entredeux. I stitched in the ditch, trimmed, zigzagged, and then did this little holding stitch, and those little holes will always just be right there so you can see how pretty they are. And now I have a piece of vintage clothing which I would really like to share with you. You are going to love this little boy's romper. It is precious. It is made out of yellow, although it's a little faded since it probably was made about 1920 and washed a lot. The cutest little collar with brown stitching, a little curved section, and this is the cutest pocket I've ever seen on any child's outfit. It's almost a little bound buttonhole. Can you see how that is a little tiny pocket? And it looks like a little basket of brown flowers. And then the little stitching around the pocket so you can put your hand in the little basket of flowers. Coming on down, the legs are, there is a little bit of elastic in the legs, but the crotch is buttoned, which was traditionally, you know, the way that you would close, because I don't think they had snaps at this time. So that is the cutest little suit, and it's perfectly plain on the back. Now, let me turn it around and just show you the back also. Just some little buttons to close the back. Long enough placket, I might add, to get that wiggly little boy into it. For our Sewing from the Heart today, I have a letter here from Lynn Chambers from Richmond, Virginia. I was a charter member and past president of the Cardinal Smockers, the Smocking Arts Guild of America chapter. And by the way, it was the first local chapter chartered in Richmond, Virginia. Many years ago, we started making we-care gowns for the Medical College of Virginia. Although I'm no longer a member and I work full-time so I can't attend the day meetings, I still love doing the gowns. When the chapter does a sew day to mass produce the gowns, I have a friend pick up a dozen or so for me. I thoroughly enjoy picking out the colors and design, no matter how small, for those special little dresses. As I stitch, I pray for the family who uses the gown. I never know what is the use of the gown, happy or sad, but I just trust that the Lord will see that the right family gets it. Lynn Chambers from Richmond, Virginia. Lynn, thank you so much for writing, and for all of you in the Saga chapter up in Richmond, Virginia, for all you're doing. Thank you for joining me today. I'd like to invite you back next time.